1773, and you might hear the name of the Boston Tea Party. Well, there's some men from Boston that dressed up as Indians loosely. They had some war paint on their faces and some feathers in their hats to sort of disguise themselves from the Sons of Liberty, which was a group that was against these atrocious actions from the British Parliament. So they talked to the Royal Governor Hutchinson of Boston to try to repel or repeal this stamp or this tax on their tea, which they didn't want. And this tax on tea was about a 30 to 40% tax on tea. So they wanted to get the ship of tea sent back to India where it came from, the tea company over there. They wanted it sent back. But the royal governor wanted to pay this tax on the tea and wanted to force it upon them. Well, seeing that they didn't have any way of resolving the matter in those terms, they dressed up, boarded the ship at nighttime, burst open roughly 340 chests of tea, dumped the contents overboard, and legend had it that they actually cleared the deck and mopped the deck and made it all nice and tidy. And legend also has it that one of the men was going to steal some stuff from the ship, but he was removed from the ship because they didn't want to steal and just burn down the whole place. They just wanted to make their point clear that they were not going to pay this tax on tea. So, of course, this naturally outraged the British in Boston there. So that Royal Governor Hutchinson was then replaced with British General Howe, and Boston was then put underneath martial law. So now they've lost their traditional rights of Englishmen as if they had them to begin with. Things are still boiling up. Patrick Henry, he spoke at the Virginia House of Burgesses in the year 1775, March 23rd, in Richmond, Virginia, addressing the House of Burgesses, and a Burgess was simply a representative. So he was talking to them, telling them that we've been petitioning with Britain for 10 years, trying to come to them on good terms, and nothing has worked, and essentially is going to break out the war at some point. In the last paragraph of his speech, he said this: "That is in vain, sir, to extenuate the matter. Gentlemen may cry, peace, peace, but there is no peace. The war has actually begun. The next gale that sweeps from the north will bring to our ears the clash of resounding arms. Our brethren are already in the field. Why stand we here idle? What is it that gentlemen wish? What would they have? Is life so dear, or peace so sweet, as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not, of course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death, in the words of Patrick Henry." That was March the 23rd of 1775, which this past March marked the 250th anniversary of Patrick Henry's speech, "Give me liberty or give me death." Well, a few short weeks later, April 18th of 1775, there's British troops already stationed in Boston after the Tea Party and everything that happened there. And the other thing that the colonists thought, why are there all these British troops in our towns along the seaside of the continent, not on the frontier going west, where there could be more French and Indian hostilities? They were all stationed in main towns in the colonies, particularly Boston. They thought, why are there these standing armies? That's something actually they mentioned in the Declaration of Independence. It makes mention of standing armies without the consent of the people. It makes mention of that in the Declaration. So there's these standing armies of British troops in different towns and things. So April 18th of 1775, they found out the Americans there, the Sons of Liberty, through intelligence and spies and all that, because there's some very interesting networks of that. They found out that the British were planning to make a military move either directly across the harbor or down through the part of Boston where they could go through Cambridge and go on land to Lexington and Concord to find Patriot munitions, firearms, gunpowder, and lead. But also they were looking for two men, Samuel Adams and John Hancock. They were looking for these two men to arrest them, possibly try them on a trial for treason, and if found guilty, they would be hanged and killed, maybe even with their family. Because see, at this time, there's also trials happening to Americans without jury, which was actually an English right to all English people underneath the crown, but it wasn't happening in America. So, April 19th, Paul Revere and others rode out through that night of April 18th to April 19th, warning the countryside that the British were coming. So the morning of April 19th, 1775, Lexington Green, Massachusetts, John Parker told his men, the militia, the Americans, to stand your ground, don't fire unless fired upon, but if they need to have war, let it begin here. The British came and told them to lay down your arms and disperse. Why stand you here, you rebels? Well, the Americans wanted to make their point clear that they were now in such a predicament of protecting their homes and their rights because the British were at their doorsteps with their families. And you don't ever hear so much about what the British were doing, and just imagine a hostile enemy coming to your doorstep. And unfortunately, at that time, it was your own government. So that's something that we think of too. So they met them. Nobody fired a shot yet. And after the Americans felt that they made their point clear, they turned their backs and started to make their way back home. All of a sudden, a shot rang out, which nobody knows who fired that shot, that caused the British to open fire onto the Americans, even though they didn't have an official order. And the Americans fired back, just sort of a brief skirmish, but there is no official order given from either side of their commanding officers. Unfortunately, 8 Americans died there in Lexington. Later on, the same day, at the Old North Bridge in Concord, the British were trying to tear up the bridge to stop the militia movement, trying to make it harder for the Americans to move about. But the Americans found them there, and both sides gave the official orders to open fire upon each other, thus starting the war for independence for this small colony of Massachusetts. See, some of the other colonies did not see it the same way. They saw it as, well, that's Boston, Massachusetts' problem. That's not South Carolina's problem. That's not Georgia's problem. It's not North Carolina's problem. But it all became their problem. And, of course, we know the next year, 1776, the Declaration of Independence came to be, uniting the 13 colonies together. But there is a history, talk about any group of people, they always have a flag or something to represent their belief, the country that they're in, and just in general what they're fighting for. So I want to go through some different flags that I brought to you today. I think you all know what this one says. Don't tread on me. So the message is clear, just simply saying you don't want to step on a snake because it's probably going to bite you. And this was a flag thought of by Benjamin Franklin. He had an idea because a lot of times the British would send people, criminals mainly, to colonize America. Well, naturally, a lot of these criminals were still criminals. And the colonists didn't really like that, having all these criminals sent over to help colonize America. So Benjamin Franklin, back in the day, he would load up barrels of rattlesnakes or tell other people about doing this trick and sending them back to the British as a sarcastic thank you, barrels of rattlesnakes. So this is called the Gaston Flag because it was designed by a man with the last name of Gaston, but having the rattlesnake, don't tread on me or interfere with our liberty at your peril. So this is some of the first American Revolutionary War flags. But I have quite a few flags to actually show you today. So, this one here, legend has it, and the reason why I want to say legend has it is because no one has an actual fact that this flag was at this battlefield other than depicted in some paintings. So after the Battle of Lexington and Concord, which happened in April, you had April, May, and June. June the 17th, the British already occupied Boston, and that was put underneath martial law. So a lot of the militia and other Americans who weren't in Boston and weren't on a parole or anything, they started to make fortifications outside of Boston. They started to do a lot of digging and all that, particularly on the night of June the 16th, I believe it was, where these men dug up a lot of trenches to make heavy fortifications and everything in anticipation of doing a siege back on Boston to fight the British. So that battle will be called the Battle of Bunker Hill, also known as the Battle of Breed's Hill. So at this battle, there was this flag, and you notice that it's red, and it has a white field up here in its top left corner, and a tree. And do you know what type of tree that might be? A cedar tree? Yep. Evergreen tree. But yes, yeah, that is correct. And a tree, particularly an evergreen tree, cedar trees, pine trees, all those, it had a significance. And the significance was that they were thought of to be a very strong tree, and that also it looks like an arrow pointing upward. Later on, there would be a flag that would just be a white field with a tree, and it just says "Appeal to Heaven," and it's simply the colonists asking for help from the Lord, thinking about the tree pointing upward to heaven. So there is a painting out there by John Trumbull, I believe was his name, but he was a spectator of the war, particularly this battle at Bunker Hill. So in that painting, this flag is in the painting, but later on, there's another painting that had this flag with a blue field. So a lot of historians don't rightly know if this is the flag that flew at Bunker Hill, but then a lot of people believe it's so because one of the spectators who watched that battle happen put this in his painting. So this is amongst some of the first American Revolutionary War flags. But still, this was still thought of as a problem up north. Well, all of a sudden, in the year 1776, warships started to come down to South Carolina by the British, because the British see it now as a problem in the colonies, not just Boston, and they're going to take it all head on. But Patrick Henry, he made a statement, paraphrasing him, that he does not see himself as a Virginian, but as an American, because they wanted to have a unifying aspect, and this came to be. So, another historical flag. Have you ever heard the name Ethan Allen? So Ethan Allen was up from that area of Vermont, is what's called Vermont now. This flag, it has 13 stars in a blue field and a big old green field surrounding that blue field. So this would be seen up there more so in the north of Vermont, but particularly with the Green Mountain Boys, which was a militia group, or also just by their name, Mountain Boys. So they're backwoods fighters. They didn't come out so much to the open, but they were very good hunters. Because you think about this, in the militia groups, a lot of the militia were excellent marksmen because they had to live off your talents of shooting, because that was your way of getting food. I mean, if you weren't a good shot and you don't hit that deer, well, your family might have not had dinner then. So they really depended upon that as a skill needed to survive in America and in the colony, especially on the frontier. So when you take those skills, and these men just lived off of, it was like they knew it like the back of their hand, and they applied it to war. It was very different from the British, because a lot of the British were just here to get a paycheck. They weren't necessarily here because they wanted to. Most of the privates in the British military. So this would be with Ethan Allen with the Green Mountain Boys. And the reason why they picked the green color was because up there in Vermont, with all the different trees and everything, they thought it would be something fitting to have green from the area that they came from. So now, move to year 1776. The Declaration of Independence is passed, but they still really didn't have a flag yet until the next year, June 14th, 1777. And there is a resolution presented to Congress stating that it was resolved that they would have a flag with 13 stripes alternating red and white in color, 13 stars in a circle in a blue field, so it represents the new 13 United States of America. So now they had this flag, which would be seen in battle, also nicknamed the Betsy Ross flag, because legend has it that George Washington and other key men went to some seamstresses, wanted to see about putting this flag together, and Betsy Ross happened to be a seamstress, so legend had it that she was the main seamstress behind putting this flag together. And as you can see, it has a lot of similarities to our current flag, same colors, and it has 13 stripes and a blue field. But do you know why all the stars are of equal size, or why they're like that? The reason being is that no state is greater than the other state. If there's 13 stars of all different sizes, sort of like how there was in the Green Mountain flag, then it's like, well, this star represents this state, this better. Well, that's not what they wanted. They wanted to make sure that each state was as equal as the other, and they're bonded together in a circle in a blue field. So what do these colors represent? So these colors, red, white, and blue. Red representing courage, white representing purity, and blue representing justice. But you think of justice in the sense of justice being dealt to the enemy. And that's something you don't ever hear so much about. Correctly so. There is sometimes injustices that the Bible talks about throughout the book of Proverbs, and having a just weight and a just balance is what the Lord says. And then it also talks about having good judgment. Because you think about the world that we live in, there's a lot of sin in the world that we live in right now. And these colors, we have red, white, and blue. And white represents purity. So purity, where does that purity come from? You think about it in the book of Isaiah, it makes mention of how Christ's blood washes our sins whiter than snow. And that is the strongest, best meaning of purity, unblemished, the color of white. And then it further describes that in the book of Ephesians, making mention of the bride coming to the husband, which the bride is the church, body of believers, coming to Christ. And because of his sacrifice, wash those sins away, thus no blemishes or anything of that nature. So it's something that plays into a group of people as well. Because it says in Psalms, it says that blessed is the nation whose Lord is God. And that's something that these founding fathers believed in very much so, and a lot of the militia and the generals of that time. But to tell you a little bit more, here's a flag. I'll tell you this so you don't have to count so much, but it has 15 stars, and it also has now 15 stripes. So it has an extra red and white stripe. Do you know why it does? Well, because in 1795 you had two new states come to be, Kentucky and Vermont. So now they added 2 stars to the field to make up from 13 states to 15 states, and 2 more stripes to go from 13 stripes to 15, to also signify those new states. But all of a sudden they realized, like, man, if we keep getting new states, we're going to have so many stripes that eventually it went back to 13 stripes, which our current flag has to represent the original 13 colonies. But this flag has a nickname to it. So it became famous later on in the War of 1812, but it actually saw action in the years of 1804 and 1805 in North Africa and Tripoli coast, which you ever heard the Marine Corps hymn from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, this flag would have been there. Do you know what its nickname is, or what we really hear it as today? The Star-Spangled Banner. That's what this flag is. So that is the Star-Spangled Banner, which would have flown at Fort McHenry, September 14th, 1814. See there, Fort McHenry, excuse me, it was there that Francis Scott Key was trying to work out a deal with some of the British to release a friend of his on a warship in the harbor off the coast of Fort McHenry right there. So all of a sudden a battle broke out there. So they kept him on the ship just to hold him pretty much as a hostage until the engagement was over. But it broke out, went on through the night, and in the early morning hours of September 14th, 1814, the flag was still there over Fort McHenry, which then inspired Francis Scott Key to write that poem, which then became our national anthem years later. But it was that flag that got nicknamed the Star-Spangled Banner. So, I'd like to show you this flag too. This one has a little different story to it. Some of you around this area, you might know the name of John Pelham, or Major John Pelham. That Pelham Road is named after, and then you have Pelham Range named after him. Well, Pelham, he was artillerist during the war between the states, also known as the Civil War. So he became very famous, though, because he went to the West Point Military Academy at age 16. And 2 weeks before graduation, he resigned because war broke out between the states. He wanted to come back home to Alabama to offer his service to the Confederacy. And after some training with some troops, he met on the town square in Jacksonville, and roughly 400 men from the area of Calhoun County up to Cherokee and Talladega County, all that area met there on the town square to say farewell to their friends and their family before they marched off to Montgomery, the Confederacy's new capital. So, this flag here is called the Stars and Bars, where it has 7 stars in a blue field and 3 stripes. A lot of the same representation played into this flag, mainly with the same colors, but also for the amount of stars that represented 7 states that now seceded from the Union to form the Confederacy. But this flag is what a lot of men would have seen down at Montgomery when they left here on the town square, including John Pelham. So this would have been the flag that they seen down in Montgomery. So it's something how time flies when you're talking. I didn't realize this already, 3, but to tell you, I reckon in summary, and then we can have a question and answer time if anybody has any thoughts or questions or anything, something you'd be thinking of now. Do you know what patriotism is defined as? So patriotism is defined as the love of one's country, the passion which aims to serve one's country, either in defending it from invasion or maintaining its laws and institutions in vigor and purity. Patriotism is the characteristic of a good citizen, the noblest passion that animates a man in the character of a good citizen. That would be from Noah Webster's dictionary of 1828. And Noah Webster himself was actually an American Revolutionary War veteran. He served with the Connecticut Rangers, and he was only in his early teens during the American Revolution. But he went on, after being coming out of the war, he went to Yale and Princeton colleges, and that, it's okay. He went there to those different colleges, but then in the year 1783, 84, and 85, he came out with some different spelling books, and then he compiled it together into the American Spelling Book and became some of America's first curriculum that included some passages from the Bible talking about the book of Genesis, and it was America's first official curriculum because they didn't want British curriculum just to say because they're a new nation. So he actually came up with a new curriculum that was used in America's first educational system, where morality played into the basis of setting the foundation for the nation. So he played a very important role, though, with helping America, too, for what it is now, and defining what patriotism is. So I'll say this last quote. You know Francis Scott Key, you know who he is. Oh, you'd be surprised how many unfortunate children don't know the name of Francis Scott Key today. But Francis Scott Key, he said this: the patriot who finds himself in the service of God, who acknowledges him in all his ways, will have the promise of almighty direction, and will find his word in his greatest darkness, a lantern to his feet and a lamp unto his paths. Therefore he will seek to establish for his own country and a guide to the world such a character as shall not make her unworthy the name of a Christian nation. So that is what Francis Scott Key said. And that's what has played into a lot of the colors of our flag and the meaning behind the colors of the flag.